I've always believed that in this fast-paced city where even love can be priced with a tag, quietly living as a programmer with a routine between home-to-office life, holding on to my single and self-sufficient peace, is the safest way to live. I don't actively reach up to anyone, nor do I want to be dragged into the quagmires of emotion. Stanley was my college roommate for 4 years. I've seen how far he's willing to go to climb the ladder, but I never imagined he'd eventually turn the blade of his scheming against me, and in a near absurd way, shatter the orderly life I'd built. Chapter 1. When Stanley called, his voice was shaking like a sieve shaky. Nathan, Elaine got into a car accident. She's at the hospital. Can you come? I abandoned my half-eaten takeout, hailed a cab, and rushed over. By the time I got to the ward, Elaine's head was wrapped in thick gauze, and her eyes were dazed. Before I could even speak, Stanley shoved me in front of the hospital bed, pointed at me, and said to Elaine, "Elaine, look clearly, he's Nathan, your boyfriend." I was completely stunned. I turned to Stanley and hissed under my breath, "Stanley, are you out of your fucking kidding me? You're her boyfriend." Stanley's face went pale. He grabbed my arm tightly and dragged me out of the ward. When we reached the stairwell, he dropped to his knees in front of me. "Bro, help me this once, just this once." Stanley's eyes were bloodshot, his voice barely a whisper. "The doctor said she has amnesia and has forgotten everything from the last 2 years. I can't be her boyfriend right now. I got an offer from the Star Glory Group's heiress. No, the heiress Irene agreed to a trial marriage with me. If Irene finds out I have a girlfriend, my life is over." I was shaking with rage as I kicked him square in the shoulder. "You're trying to throw your girlfriend of 3 years to me just so you can latch on to a rich woman? Are you even human?" Stanley picked himself up off the floor, his eyes full of selfish calculation. "Nathan, you're single too, and Elaine is gorgeous. Taking care of her won't be a loss for you. I'll transfer you $5,000 a month for living expenses. Once I've settled in after marrying Irene, I'll find a way to come clean with Elaine. Please, if you don't agree, I'll jump off a building." I looked at Elaine in the hospital room, her face pale, fragile like a broken porcelain doll, and my heart churned. Why me? I'm just an ordinary programmer, sticking to my single lifestyle. Stanley was my college roommate, but I never imagined he could have imagined he'd sink this low. Yet Elaine was innocent. If I exposed the truth now, she would wake up to the harsh reality of her boyfriend cheating and the whole world lying to her. I gritted my teeth and made up my mind. Elaine looked at me, a flicker of complex darkness flashing in her eyes, so fast that I couldn't catch it. "Nathan," she called tentatively, her voice soft and gentle, like a feather brushing against my heart. "Yeah, it's me." I braced myself and walked over, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Am I really, your girlfriend?" She tilted her head, her big, clear eyes gazing intently at me intently. "Yes, you were in a car accident, and there are some things you don't remember." I forced a stiff smile, my heart heavy with guilt. Stanley hid behind the door, clasping his hands and bowing to me through the glass window, his face full of gratitude. Then he hastily sent a message, "Brother, no need for words of thanks. I'll leave Elaine to you. The fee has been transferred. I'll go accompany Irene first." Looking at the 5,000 yuan transferred to my phone, I felt the money was tainted. But seeing Elaine's fragile and helpless gaze, I swallowed back all the curse words. On the day of discharge, I brought Elaine back to my rented 2-bedroom apartment. To avoid any suspicion, I gave her the master bedroom and moved into the cluttered smaller room. "Sleep here tonight, call me anytime if you need anything." I set down her suitcase and nervously ran my hand through my hair. Elaine stood in the middle of the living room, glancing around the small yet tidy, and turned to me with a sweet smile. "Thank you, darling." That single "darling" made my bones feel a little weak, and the moral strings in my mind instantly tightened. I'm no saint. Elaine was widely considered beautiful, fair-skinned, tall, and slender. Now, in a loose white sweater, she looked even more endearing. I cooked steaming hot noodles for dinner. Elaine sat at the dining table, with a cast on her right hand, held chopsticks in her left, clumsily unable to pick anything up. Noodle soup splashes of soup landed on her fair cheeks. "Let me do it," I sighed, taking the chopsticks from her hand. I picked up a strand of noodles, gently blew on it, and brought it to her lips. Elaine obediently opened her mouth, her eyes curving into a sly fox-like smile. "Delicious. How thoughtful you are, darling." Don't call me darling. Just call me Nathan." I turned my head away, afraid to meet her gaze that seemed to see right through me. She bit her lower lip in grievance, her eyes instantly turning red. "Why? Aren't we a couple? Is it because I lost my memory, and now you despise me?" "No, absolutely not." I immediately panicked, quickly pulling out a tissue to wipe her tears. My fingers accidentally brushed against her delicate cheek, and it felt like an electric shock. I had been shocked. I pulled my hand back hastily. Late at percent night, lying on the small bed in the guest room, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. Phone buzzed. Stanley had posted a photo on his social media account. The background was a top-tier Western restaurant. A large hand adorned with a Vacheron Constantin watch was tightly clasped with a woman's hand wearing a Cartier diamond ring. The caption read, "A new life, a new beginning." I let out a cold laugh and was about to turn off my phone when the door to the second bedroom was gently pushed open. Elaine stood at the doorway, hugging a pillow, barefoot, with moonlight spilling over her like a layer of silver gauze. "Nathan, I'm scared," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What's wrong?" I sat up abruptly. I just now saw Stanley's post in the living room. She handed me her phone. On the screen was exactly that boastful photo Stanley had shared. My heart skipped a beat. Damn, had she found something? I was nervously racking my brain for an explanation when Elaine sniffled and, acting out of character, walked over to my bedside, pulled back the covers, and slipped into bed. "Stanley used to take good care of me. I'm happy that he's found happiness." Elaine slipped into my blanket, her arms suddenly wrapping around my waist as she pressed against me. "But Nathan, seeing other people's happiness suddenly makes me afraid. Will you leave me? Tonight, I want to sleep with you." The scent of her body wash on her hit me like a tidal wave. At that moment, in the darkness, my heart was pounding like a drum. A strong question surfaced in my mind. Elaine's social accounts should have long been deleted or blocked by Stanley. How did she even see them? Had she really lost her memory? Chapter 2. Elaine's breathing gradually steadied, as if she had fallen asleep. But my body was as stiff as a stone, not daring to move an inch. Her warm, delicate body pressed tightly against my back, one slender leg even draped over mine. This intimacy had completely crossed the boundary of being at stand-in. At 2 a.m, my phone on the nightstand suddenly buzzed violently. The screen lit up with Stanley's name. Afraid of waking Elaine, I quickly answered, lowering my voice as I pressed the call button. "Stanley, what the hell are you on about in the middle of the night?" The other end of the line came with a chaotic background noise, vaguely the thumping bass of a bar. Stanley's voice carried a hint of drunkenness and suppressed anger. "Nathan. Where's Elaine? I just checked the surveillance footage of your neighborhood. You picked her up this afternoon. Where is she now? Is she in your bed?" I turned my head to look at Elaine, who was sleeping soundly beside me, and a surge of inexplicable anger welled up inside me. "Stanley, are you out of your mind?" I sneered through gritted teeth. "You were the one who pushed her onto me. You were the one who asked me to be her boyfriend. Now you're holding a rich woman on one arm while checking up my right hand. What gives you the right to ask if she's in my bed? Nathan, don't forget you're just a stand-in. If you so much as lay a finger on her, I'll break you." Stanley roared on the other end of the phone, like a dog whose tail had been stepped on. "Break me?" The pent-up frustration of days finally exploded, and my voice rose. "Stanley, if you've got the guts, come back right now and tell Elaine the truth. Can you?" "No, you can't. You're afraid the rich woman will dump you, afraid you'll lose your future. Since you've chosen to be a dog, don't act like a wolf in front of me. You." Stanley immediately backed down, his tone softening. "Bro, that's not what I meant. I just feel awful. You're a man too, you get it. Don't touch her, I'm begging you. Slap. I hung up the phone directly. Screw you, bro. Looking at Elaine lying beside me, beautiful as a painting under the moonlight, a subtle shift stirred within me. Stanley's selfishness and greed had completely torn away the thickest moral barrier in my heart. Since you show no mercy, don't blame me. You brought her to my door yourself. Just as I was about to put down my phone, I looked down and noticed that Elaine's hand, originally wrapped around my waist, was quietly gripping the edge of my shirt. Her eyelashes trembling faintly. She was pretending to be asleep. She had heard every word of my conversation with Stanley. A bold thought exploded in my mind: she knew the truth. Or rather, she had known from the very beginning that Stanley was lying to her. To confirm my suspicion, I turned around and slowly leaned in slowly toward her. Elaine's breathing grew rapid, her chest heaving violently, and even the tips of her ears flushed a rosy pink. I reached out, my fingertips gently brushing against her fair, soft cheek. She didn't flinch, but instead nuzzled her face into my palm. I took a deep breath, slowly lowered my head, and tentatively pressed a light kiss on her full, red lips. It was a fleeting kiss, a mere brush of lips. Warm and sweet. Elaine's body stiffened instantly, yet she didn't open her eyes nor push me away. At that moment, everything became clear to me. This act of amnesia was not only being performed by Stanley but also by Elaine. She went along with the flow, using Stanley's lies to get close to me. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the room. Elaine groggily opened her eyes, and upon seeing me, she immediately blushed. Embarrassed, she buried her face in the blanket and muttering in a muffled voice, "Nathan, about last night." "I'm sorry, I was just so scared." "It's okay," I replied with a faintly smiled. The probing from last night had boosted my confidence. Throwing off the covers, I got out of bed, bent down, and scooped her up in my arms. "Ah!" Elaine cried out in surprise, instinctively wrapping her uninjured arm tightly around my neck. "What are you doing?" "Carry my girlfriend to wash up." I looked at her, a hint of aggression in my eyes. Elaine's face instantly turned red all the way to the base of her neck. She lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. "The doctor said I only broke my hand, not my leg." I carried her to the bathroom sink, watching her shy expression, and couldn't resist leaning in to plant a firm kiss on her smooth forehead. "Just collecting some interest first." I teased her with a mischievous smile. Elaine was too embarrassed to lift her head and hit me with her left hand. "You're so bad." After breakfast, I helped Elaine tidy up the master bedroom's closet, preparing to hang her clothes. It was an old large wardrobe that Stanley had left here before. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the closet, originally intending to put socks in, but instantly froze as if turned to stone. Lated. In the drawer lay an unopened sex doll, its packaging printed with explicit and provocative images. This was a prop Stanley had previously stored here, and I had long forgotten about it. Just then, Elaine happened to walk to the doorway and poked her head in. "Nathan, my skirt." Our eyes met. Elaine's gaze fell on the massive packaging box, its text and images unsightly to behold. The air instantly became so quiet that even a pin dropping could be heard. The smile on Elaine's lips gradually froze, and her originally rosy cheeks abruptly turned pale. This was left by Stanley." I hurriedly explained, sweating profusely from anxiety. Elaine looked at me, then at the doll, her expression growing increasingly complicated. She took a deep breath, as if trying hard to suppress something, and finally gritted her teeth and blurted out, "Nathan, do you men all like this kind of thing?" That remark, tinged with a hint of gritted teeth clarity, completely exposed the fact that she hadn't lost her memory at all. The atmosphere became unbearably awkward. Seeing her slightly angry yet clear-eyed look, my heart skipped a beat, and I had to prove my innocence right there and then. I hurriedly kicked the crate back to the deepest part of the drawer. Raising both hands in a gesture of surrender, he quickly explained, "Elaine, listen to me, this really has nothing to do with me. In our freshman year, Stanley had an online girlfriend, got all caught up in the moment, and secretly bought this thing without telling anyone. But before the package arrived, he got scammed and blocked. He was too embarrassed to keep it in his own dorm, so he ended up shoved at the very bottom of this wardrobe in my room. I haven't opened this drawer in 3 years. If I were actually into this kind of stuff, would I have left it untouched all this time? Hearing my flustered explanation, Elaine's originally tense expression finally relaxed. She let out a chuckle, a hint of mischievous triumph flickering in her eyes, and muttered softly, "I figured you wouldn't dare." The awkward atmosphere then dissipated, leaving only unspoken, lingering ambiguity in the air. Chapter 3. Over the weekend, Stanley proactively sent a message, inviting us to visit a high-end shopping mall. "Nathan, bring Elaine out for a stroll. I'd like to introduce a friend to you both. Also, let's pick up a few outfits for Elaine." The sour stench of a nouveau riche oozed between his lines. I knew exactly what he was up to. He wanted to completely pin Elaine on me in front of the wealthy woman, so he could rest easy. At 2 p.m., on the first floor of the mall, Stanley was arm in arm with a woman who appeared to be around 35 or 36, decked out in designer brands and holding a Hermes handbag. Though well-maintained, fine lines spread from the corners of her eyes, and she looked at Stanley as if he were an obedient pet. "Stanley, is this the brother you were talking about, the one who turned a disaster into a blessing?" The wealthy woman looked me up and down, her eyes filled with condescending disdain. "Yeah, Irene, this is Nathan. And this is his girlfriend, Elaine." Stanley deliberately emphasized the word girlfriend, but his eyes couldn't help sweeping over Elaine, a flicker of admiration and jealousy flashing through them. Today's Elaine was wearing a simple white dress. Although her arm was bandaged, she looked as pure as a lily, making the heavily made-up wealthy woman seem like an ant. Hello, I'm Nathan. This is my dear girlfriend, Elaine." I smiled slightly and casually wrapped my arm around Elaine's slender waist. Elaine's slim waist. Elaine cooperated seamlessly. She cooperated, leaning softly into my embrace. She took the milk tea from my hand and took a big sip through my straw. "Nathan, this is too sweet." "You drank it, it's too sweet, help me finish it," she said coquettishly, handing the milk tea back to my lips. "All right, whatever you say." I smiled and gulped down the remaining milk tea in one go. Stanley, standing opposite, saw this scene and his eye twitched violently. The hand hanging by his side clenched instantly, his knuckle ashen white. He's jealous. This selfish man, while wanting a wealthy woman's money, sees his ex-girlfriend so close to his good buddy, and the possessiveness inside him starts acting up again. Seeing his sour expression made me secretly delighted. The wealthy woman pulled Stanley into a high-end women's clothing store. "Stanley, the spring collection here is quite nice. Pick out a piece for this young lady, my treat." The wealthy woman put on a magnanimous, queen-like demeanor. In order to impress her, Stanley chose a limited edition lace dress priced at $28,000 and handed it to Elaine. "Elaine, go try this on. Back when you were with me, back then Nathan couldn't afford to buy you nice things, but today I'm giving it to you." Elaine looked at me, and I patted her on the back. "Go ahead, dear, try it on." Elaine took the dress and entered the fitting room. Due to her injured right hand, she struggled inside for a while without making any progress. "Nathan, can you come in and help me? I can't pull up the zipper." Elaine's somewhat anxious voice came from the fitting room. The wealthy woman outside sneered, "Young people these days, young people really have no sense of time or place." Stanley's face had turned as dark as water dripping from ink. I pushed open the door to the fitting room and walked in, locking it behind me. The small space was filled with the pleasant scent of Elaine's perfume. The zipper of the long dress was stuck at her waist, revealing a large expanse pale, delicate, and as smooth as white jade. My breathing quickened as I walked over, my trembling fingers gripping the zipper. I slowly pulled the zipper up slowly. The moment it clicked shut, I couldn't contain the heat inside me and wrapped my arms around her from behind. Lowering my head, I pressed a fierce kiss onto her long, fair neck. Elaine tilted her head back, letting out a muffled moan, then turned around to kiss me back with equal passion. It was the most thrilling zipper kiss we'd ever shared in such a cramped space. When we came out of the fitting room, Elaine's face was flushed and her lips slightly swollen. Stanley, being experienced, could tell at a glance what had happened and breathed heavily in anger. "Nathan, this dress doesn't really suit me, and $28,000 is too expensive." "We can't afford it," Elaine said deliberately, a hint of disappointment in her voice. The wealthy woman rolled her eyes beside him and sneered, "If you can't afford it, don't try it on. Stanley, Nathan here has some backbone, he doesn't want us to buy us to gift it. Let's go." Stanley grabbed the wealthy woman, pulled the woman close and sneered at me, "Nathan, if you're broke, don't bring your girlfriend into places like this. Elaine's really suffering being with you." I sneered coldly as I watched their triumphant backs when they walked away triumphantly. While Elaine was in the restroom, I turned to the sales assistant and said, "Swipe my card. Wrap up the dress from earlier. Also, package the inner top." She glanced at a few extra times. "Two expenses wiped out 2 months of my savings, but I don't feel bad about it." When I got home, I handed the exquisite shopping bag to Elaine. She paused, looking at me in disbelief. You actually bought it?" "My woman, if others have it, you should have it too." I looked at her and said seriously. Elaine's eyes instantly welled up with tears. She suddenly threw herself into my arms, locking her hands tightly around my neck, and kissed me on the lips. This time, it wasn't a test or an act. "Nathan, thank you," she murmured affectionately between breaths. That evening, Stanley sent a message with an unequivocal tone, "Next weekend, the weekend, let's go to the Linghu honeymoon villa, me and Irene, and you too. This is the last time final, I need to prove to Irene that I'm completely done with Elaine. Nathan, bring her along. Don't screw things up on me." Looking at this message, I sent a voice note back, my tone icy, "Don't worry, Stanley, we'll be there on time." Final. Indeed, it's time to settle this once and for all. Chapter 4. Linghu Resort. Stanley rented a lakeside couples vacation villa. The atmosphere here was incredibly intimate, with soft drapes, aromatherapy, and dim, warm-toned lighting everywhere. During dinner, Stanley kept pouring me one drink after another, while the rich woman sat nearby chatting with Elaine about topics flaunting her wealth. "Nathan, if you're a real man, down this drink." Stanley's eyes were dark and piercing, fixed on me. I accepted without hesitation. Tonight, it's still uncertain who will hit the floor first. Late at night, the drinking party dispersed. Elaine and I returned to the king-sized bedroom on the second floor. The alcohol was burning in my blood, fully igniting the suppressed possessiveness and frustration in my heart. There was a huge round bed in the room, facing the sparkling Linghu lake outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Nathan, you've had too much to drink." Elaine walked over, trying to help me take off my jacket off. I grabbed her wrist, and with a little force, pulled her entire body into my arms, both arms, and we both fell onto the soft round bed together. "Elaine, have you really lost your memory?" I looked at the stunning face so close to mine, my voice low and hoarse. Elaine's eyes trembled slightly, and then, she unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her shirt herself, revealing her delicate collarbone. "Now, does it still matter?" She reached out her uninjured left hand, wrapped it around my neck, and initiated the kiss. All the emotions and desires that had been building up over these days finally exploded right at this moment. The sheets wrinkled, red curtains swaying. In this lover's sweet thick with an air of ambiguity, we crossed that final line. Everything that belonged to Stanley, tonight, I covered it all, completely, last night, leaving not even a trace. The next morning. Because of the previous night's wildness, Elaine felt a bit weak, and when she got out of bed, her steps carried a faint, subtle awkwardness. She was wearing the lace dress I had bought her the night before, and she took my arm as we went downstairs for breakfast. Stanley was sitting in the living room, drinking coffee. He was a married man. Just one look at the way Elaine walked, and another at the faint, telling bruise on her neck, and he froze as if struck by lightning. Slap. His coffee cup hit the table hard, spilling coffee everywhere. "Nathan. You." Stanley charged at me like a mad bull, grabbing me by the collar. His eyes were bloodshot, and veins bulged on his forehead. "Let go," I said coldly, my gaze devoid of any warmth. "I told you not to touch her. Did you take my words as mere background noise?" Stanley completely lost it completely. He thought he had everything under control, believing he could store his ex-girlfriend away like personal property, only to realize he had been thoroughly cuckolded. "Stanley, what the hell are you doing? Irene is still upstairs." The rich woman's voice came from the staircase. Regardless of anything, Stanley threw a punch at me. I sidestepped to dodge the punch and followed up with a shoulder throw, slamming him hard onto the cold marble floor. I stepped on his chest and looked down at him from above. "Stanley, listen to me clearly. You were the one who pushed her into my hands for the money. Now, in Elaine's eyes, you're not even worth a strand of dog hair. You have no right anymore." Stanley lay on the ground, breathing heavily, his eyes full of resentment. "Nathan, don't be smug. When she regains her memory, when she remembers how much she used to love me, she'll come back to me. She'll hate you for the rest of her life." Hearing this, I turned my head and looked at Elaine beside me. Elaine stared coldly at Stanley on the ground, with no warmth in her eyes, only a deep disgust. I sneered, wrapped my arm around Elaine, and walked away proudly. That same night, as soon as Elaine and I got home, someone violently pounded on our door. "Open up. Nathan, open the door." When I opened the door, Stanley stormed in with a stack of photos in his hands, his face twisted with rage. Those photos were old intimate pictures of him and Elaine, along with some explicit chat logs. "Elaine. Look clearly. I am your boyfriend. We've been together for 3 years. Stanley hurled the photos in front of Elaine, screaming hysterically, "Nathan is a liar. He took advantage of you when you lost your memory. You love me." He thought that by provoking these memories, he could make Elaine regain her memory, and thus take revenge on me. However, Elaine didn't even glance at those photos. She walked over to me and, right in front of Stanley, interlaced her fingers with mine. Looking at Stanley, she spoke clearly and deliberately, word by word. "Stanley, what nonsense are you talking about? My boyfriend has always been Nathan, from the very beginning." Stanley froze on the spot, as if plunged into an icy abyss. What did you say?" Stanley stared at Elaine in disbelief. "I said, the person I love is Nathan. Those disgusting photos of yours, you forged them yourself, didn't you?" Elaine sneered, her eyes filled with an icy clarity. Stanley finally came to his senses. He pointed at Elaine, his fingers trembling. You didn't lose your memory. Have you been faking it from the very beginning?" Elaine decided not to hide it any longer. She looked at him coldly. "So what if I was? Stanley, you cheated on me behind my back and lived off me like a sponge. Do you think I didn't know? You thought you were so clever, using me as a tool to pawn off on Nathan. But what you don't know is that the person I had a crush on in college, from the very beginning to end, has always been Nathan. If it weren't for Nathan insisting on being single back then, it never would have been your turn to get to me first. You pushing me into his arms was exactly what I wanted." This earth-shattering twist not only left Stanley dumbfounded but also gave me a sharp jolt deep down. So that lie born of mistake lie after the car accident had actually been Elaine's long-planned scheme all along. Stanley had completely lost his mind. He had meticulously calculated, thinking he could trade a woman for wealth and status, only to realize that he was nothing more than a stepping stone on someone else's path to true love. "You adulterous pair. I'll make you pay." Stanley gritted his teeth and stormed out. Stanley's revenge came swiftly. 3 days later, our company's HR called me into the office and, with a grim expression, handed me a termination notice. "Nathan, someone reported you to headquarters for having a chaotic personal life and stealing another man's fiancée, accompanied by a large number of complaint letters and photos. To protect the company's image, we have no choice but to let you go." I knew this was Stanley's doing. In front of the wealthy woman, he had played his cards, but I was ready to fight back. I took a deep breath, from the folder, a photo shoot schedule and the divorce agreement signed by the wealthy woman. HR, I suggest you take a good look at these documents, and then call Mr. Stanley in for a conversation. Let's see who the real loss belongs to. I sat in the coffee shop downstairs from my office, let out a cold sneer. Did they think this would finish me? I took out my phone and dialed the number of Irene, the heiress of the Star Glory Group, the wealthy woman in question. Hello, Ms. Irene. This is Nathan. I think you might be quite interested in Stanley's past. I sent over a meticulously compiled audio file. It was an audio recording Stanley had personally made in the dorm and after drinking, evaluating the wealthy woman, that old woman. If it weren't for her money, I wouldn't even look at her. She's as stiff as a zombie in bed. Where's the comfort of a young girl? Once I get the shares, I'll kick her out first thing. These audio clips were automatically recorded by a live stream software when Stanley was boasting while drunk. I never thought much of them before, but now they've become a lethal weapon. Not only that, I also included records of Stanley's hotel check-ins and intimate messages with several young models. Within less than half an hour, the legal department of Star Glory Group issued a statement. Stanley was formally sued by Star Glory Group for embezzlement and fraud, and the company demanded the return of all previously gifted luxury cars, properties, and millions in funds. Stanley was completely finished. Cornered, Stanley stopped me in a narrow alley. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and he clutched a sharp fruit knife tightly in his hand. Nathan. You've destroyed everything. I'll fight you to the death. He swung the knife at me hysterically. I was already prepared. In college, I was the vice president of the school's Sonda Club, and Stanley, a weakling drained by wine and women, was no match for me. I sidestepped the blade and landed a heavy punch squarely on his liver. Stanley let out a scream, immediately collapsed to his knees, and the knife clattered to the ground. The patrolling security guards and police quickly rushed over and pinned him to the ground. What awaited him was the severe punishment of the law and an endless prison sentence. After the commotion died down, I returned to the small home I shared with Elaine. Elaine had cooked a full table of dishes, wearing an apron in the kitchen. I hugged her from behind, held her, burying my head into the nape of her neck. I'm sorry, because of me, I've put you through so many scares. And now I'm jobless. Elaine turned around, cupped my face in her hands, her eyes full of tenderness and determination. What's there to fear about being joblessness? I'll support you. Besides, don't you still have me? Nathan, thank you for not abandoning me back then. I pretended to have amnesia just to take a gamble, to see if I truly mattered to you. And now? Did you win or lose? I asked with a mischievous grin. Elaine's cheeks flushed. She leaned in and bit my lip. You won. You've won me. 3 months later. Elaine and I, holding our newly issued marriage certificate, walked out hand in hand. The sun was blazing, casting its warmth on our smiling faces, cozy and reassuring. I pulled her closer to me. This absurd charade that began with a lie had, in the end, become a lifelong commitment of genuine love and devotion. And that selfish scoundrel, who sought to toy with everyone's lives, ultimately plunged himself into the abyss of greed, meeting his own ruin.